Is the microphone, I have no clue if the microphone working is. Alright, haven't used a mic ever before. So my name is Ben Horwitz, and I'm a research associate at the Greater New Orleans Community Data Center. In my presentation today, I'll discuss how we disseminate data and how that has evolved over time. For those of you who may not be familiar with the Greater New Orleans Community Data Center, I want to introduce our organization. The Data Center makes evidence-based community decision-making possible. For 15 years, we've disseminated the most reliable data and objective analysis of local demographic and economic trends and community well-being indicators to fuel decision-making toward a more prosperous and inclusive community. We not only compile the data, but analyze it, employing the latest scientific methods, documenting all our sources for complete transparency, and publishing our findings in plain language that effectively and succinctly convey our conclusions. Through this work, we've informed New Orleans philanthropic, nonprofit, and economic development decision makers, but also decision making at nearly every level of government. We do this because we believe community decisions and investments are most effective when they are evidence-based, and community change is most possible when all groups have access to the same information. So we make all of our information freely available to all. We developed and refined this strategy over time with years of experience, providing evidence-based data analysis and dissemination to the community. We first identify the most relevant research questions by determining the community context, going to things like community meetings, staying up on the local news, reading the literature review, also to understand the context of things. We then think about what available data might help answer these questions, what their limitations are. Then we compile and analyze the data in order to draw conclusions from it. Then we start thinking about how do we display our conclusions, how do we disseminate them, and what technology might be available to assist with this. As I mentioned, our strategy has evolved over time, so I wanted to spend most of my time today discussing the different products or pieces of our work that we do. First, I'll discuss the Pre-Katrina website and current neighborhood data profiles. Then I will look at our New Orleans Index and how that has changed over time. I'll talk about our action-oriented research, which is the bulk of our work. And finally, I will touch on some of what I call the technology-heavy data dissemination. So first, let's look at the Pre-Katrina website. The Data Center was founded in 1997 and developed our website in 2001. Since then, it has been the most trusted source for New Orleans data, receiving 5,000 unique visits per month before Katrina. Through our Pre-Katrina website, users could find neighborhood data using the map as a point of entry. We developed neighborhood pages that have a historical snapshot of the neighborhood as well as data tables from the 2000 census. These data tables cover many topics including people, housing, income and poverty, educational attainment, and more. As you can see, we publish data for that neighborhood as well as how that neighborhood compares to Orleans Parish, the state, and the nation. And prior to Katrina, we started working on adding stories behind the data to integrate the community voice into the data tables. For example, at 59%, the Lower Ninth Ward had a higher rate of home ownership than the rest of the city. We asked some residents about that, and here's what one of them had to say. This was one of the first subdivisions that was designated for African Americans. The idea was just so wonderful to be able to buy a lot for $250, to build a house, and be a homeowner. When my family first came here, we cut a street, a path really, to get back to this lot. In the Ninth Ward, you've got a group of people who have stayed because we wanted to, because we got an investment in this community. Stories like this help to build the context in which we can view the data and make it a lot richer for all of us. And as you can see, this quote highlights that the Lower Ninth Ward was one of the first subdivisions that African Americans could build and live in, and the community investments that developed. Finally, we made the neighborhood data available for download so that people could access it in Excel and work with it offline. Behind all of our web work was usability testing and an evidence-based approach. We user tested the initial design and subsequent changes by working one-on-one with members of our community to see how our design enabled them to accomplish the task they came to our website for. Through user testing, we changed our design to make definitions and other just-in-time learning easier to find and understand. The website was designed to meet 80% of the questions that users would have. But for the other 20%, we created a feature called Ask Allison, in which New Orleans area nonprofits could receive up to 1 hour of free assistance to help answer their questions about local data. This feature has been extremely helpful and popular among our nonprofit community, and has been very useful to us as we're able to learn about the type of questions and data of import to our constituents. This enabled us to continually publish information that is relevant and actionable to the community. This feature has continued today, now called Questions, and again is available to New Orleans area nonprofits to provide them with 1 hour of assistance with questions about local data. As a result of all this work, these web pages continue to be extremely useful and popular post-Katrina, as everyone wanted to learn more about New Orleans. And because the pages were rigorously user tested, we knew we had a design schema to build on when the 2010 census was released. With the release of the 2010 census, we created new neighborhood pages with the available demographic information. This included gender, race, age, household information, and some basic housing information. However, with the 2010 census, the Census Bureau stopped collecting socioeconomic data from the decennial census and instead relied on collecting this data from the American Community Survey. While these pages received over 28,000 visits in the first 6 months and over 150 visits per day, we knew from the questions we received through our website that we need to figure out how to display the socioeconomic data. So as a little bit of background, the American Community Survey, or ACS, is a survey of roughly 3 million households to gather socioeconomic data for the United States. Every year, updated data is available. Because it is a survey, the ACS only has enough responses to provide information for areas with larger than 65,000 people. This includes the nation, states, metro areas, and large counties like Orleans Parish. As a result, for smaller areas, they aggregate multiple years' worth of data in order to have enough respondents to publish the information. For areas with more than 20,000 people, data is available from a 3-year average, while data at the census tract or neighborhood level are available from a 5-year average. So with any survey, like the ACS, the data comes with a margin of error. And this is important because we have to consider that margin of error when interpreting and analyzing the data. One of the challenges of working with the 5-year data is that the error term is quite large at the neighborhood level. And we have the added difficulty of dealing with post-Katrina rebuilding and recovering in the 2006 and 2007 ACS. As you can see, we ultimately decided to provide the margin of error alongside the data point, as well as some other just-in-time learning. We thought this would help our users understand what all of this means. In fact, our experience has been that providing answers for common questions where they are likely to arise helps provide our users with a more effective learning experience. One such just-in-time learning is a pop-up window that explains what the 2006 to 2010 data is all about. In addition, we provide examples of how one can write about it in their grant. Under that same model, we developed a pop-up window to provide just-in-time learning on the margin of error. As you can see, we've provided information about what the margin of error is and how one can write about it in their grant report. We also know that people want to compare their neighborhood to the city, or the nation, or back to 2000. But the margin of error makes these easy comparisons difficult. To help our users, and especially to help them impress funders, we developed this widget using JavaScript and HTML to take any 2 data points and their margin of error to determine if they are statistically different. So here's an example in which we take 2 data points and the margin of errors, and we see that they are statistically different at the 90th percentile. And we provide sample text about how they can write about the statistical significance in a grant report to make this easier for our users. We also know that the margin of error makes adding data points together to create your own categories not as straightforward as it may appear. So for data points like income or educational attainment, we created a widget that allows you to combine multiple data points as well as the margin of error, and it will produce both the aggregate data point and the aggregate margin of error. Now, our current neighborhood pages build off the work of our pre-Katrina website, and they add the addition of working with the American Community Survey and the complexities of the margin of error. We know from experience that this type of basic information helps nonprofit and civic leaders better understand the areas in which they serve, and often provides them with useful data for various uses, including grant applications. Now let's look at our other most popular product, the New Orleans Index. After Katrina, we worked with the Brookings Institution to provide a monthly summary of key economic and social indicators for the New Orleans Metro. These included property sales, construction permits, sales tax data, employment data, and more. With the second anniversary edition, we started publishing this on a quarterly basis through the fourth anniversary. Then with the fifth anniversary, we transitioned the New Orleans Index away from benchmarking ourselves to 2005 and instead towards a community indicator report. While working to develop the New Orleans Index at 5, in our new community indicator approach, we researched what other communities across the country were doing. This research confirmed that it is imperative to look at how we as a region are doing over time and across a wide range of domains. Through this research on measuring regional prosperity, the New Orleans Index looks at how New Orleans is doing across 4 domains: in economic growth, inclusive growth, sustainable growth, and quality of life. And we have found that many of these indicators do not change considerably from year to year. So we've transitioned to publishing this every other year. With the release of the New Orleans Index last year at 6, we're on pace to release the New Orleans Index at 8 next year and the New Orleans Index at 10 in 2015. In addition to the neighborhood data pages and the New Orleans Index, we also do action-oriented research, which I mentioned earlier is the bulk of our work. Our experience is that access to information alone is insufficient, and that funders, government agencies, and nonprofits want analysis as well. We provide action-oriented research for decision makers on different issues. For the last 3 years, we have published reports on housing that examined affordability, light, and the impending elder boom. In our reports, we first framed the issue to provide context for our subsequent data analysis. And for these reports, we use data from a variety of sources, including the Census Bureau, Bureau of Labor Statistics, HUD aggregated data from USPS, real estate market data, and more. Before using a new data set, we always make sure to vet it to ensure it meets our level of rigor. This process includes researching other reports that have used this data set, finding out what its limitations are, as well as the methodology behind creating it. We know from experience that data integrity is crucial to our credibility. So we are careful about which data sources we use, and we state all limitations in plain language. Through this process, we create clear and easy to understand graphics that convey the conclusions of our analysis, and write our reports in plain language that effectively and succinctly convey our conclusions. We all know that we'd rather read something that's easy to understand than sometimes what we encounter in academic journals. And certainly decision makers are no different. To conduct our analysis, we use a variety of tools. We primarily conduct data analysis in Excel, including creating demographic projection and conducting statistical significant tests. We use programs like SPSS and GIS to analyze data in very specific ways. And we use GIS to graphically display the conclusions from our analysis. We have learned that if you want to truly democratize data, we need to diversify our dissemination methods. As we near the end of any research product, we often meet with relevant stakeholders ranging from public officials to nonprofits actively engaged in the work in order to make sure our analysis and conclusions from the data make sense with what they are seeing on the ground. In addition, after releasing our products online, we often hold meetings or forums to discuss the implications of the findings with a variety of stakeholders and decision makers. These meetings have proven to be successful at bringing together different stakeholders and creating new opportunities for synergies in their work. We also make presentations to groups or meetings such as the city's FlightStat meetings or the Workforce Investment Board. These presentations provide us with an opportunity to provide these stakeholders with a context and analysis of the report, as well as answer any questions that may arise. Finally, we know to truly democratize data, we have to get on TV in the newspaper, and on the radio. A survey in 2010 from the Kaiser Family Foundation found that nearly 40% of New Orleans households do not have internet. So we know we have to use multiple methods of dissemination to get this information to the entire community. We've also used cutting-edge technology to display information in interactive ways as an additional method to democratize data. Working with the After School Partnership, we created an online mapper of after-school providers. Working with the Literacy Alliance, we created an online map that examined literacy services by neighborhood. And after Katrina, we published an interactive repopulation mapper that showed the percent repopulation in a given block across the city. All of these interactive maps recreated from the same user-centered design framework I discussed earlier, and we user tested all of these interactives such that we made changes to them as needed to make the design and functionality more useful to the community. Over the last year, we've created interactive using the program called Tableau to accompany some of our data products. These visualizations display the conclusions or important data points that users can explore through interaction. One of the reasons for choosing the Tableau software is that it does not require Flash, something many community members do not have. However, that does speak to the limitations of these data sets, of these visualizations rather. They can do a great job of helping people grok or understand the conclusions or explore pieces of the analysis. But many people in our community do not have internet, as I already mentioned, and those that do have internet often have small computer screens, slow internet speeds, and low levels of technical ability. These challenges alone mean solely relying on visualizations as a method of disseminating data will be incomplete. In addition, we know from experience that meetings are an important and effective method for discussing the findings of our analyses, but that discussing an online visualization can be difficult in a meeting space, let alone impossible if the meeting space does not have internet. Moreover, decision makers do not have time to explore visualizations in order to determine the conclusions of the analysis. So in short, we have found that visualizations can increase the effectiveness of data dissemination, but are only one piece. As an organization, we face several challenges. The first, in the era of data, there's lots of it out there. So we need to find the relevant and actionable data, and as I mentioned earlier, finding data that meets our level of rigor. The primary method we use to address this challenge is by constantly researching the fields we are active in and exploring new data sets when we receive them. The second big challenge is the assumption that correlation means causation. In social science research, it is often very difficult to find causal links. Therefore, it is important to think about all of the factors that may impact a particular data point, and we deal with this by being precise about what the data is and is not stating, and publishing our methodology and limitations in plain language. The third issue is one I already discussed, pertaining to the American Community Survey and the inherent reliability issues with the margin of error. We've dealt with this by providing the margin of error in transparency, providing a widget that helps users use the data responsibly, and when necessary, we conduct the statistical significant test for any of our reports. And finally, we have the challenge of maximizing our impact with limited resources. We could pull together data in spreadsheets or make maps or even write analyses that will ultimately just sit on the shelf somewhere. But we have found the best way to maximize our impact is to be out in the community so that we are attuned to the issues that are of import to the various stakeholders and follow the dissemination strategy I discussed earlier. So at this time, I'd be happy to take any questions you may have.
Do the nonprofits that use the Ask Allison, or what do you call it?
Now it's called Questions.
Questions. How do they sign up for a specific time and it's just that hour of service, or do they meet, or does it all over the computer? Or
well, we have a questions feature through our website. So first they submit their question, and the great part about that is we have that go to the entire team, so that if one of us is more expert about something than the other, we all can be aware of the question that's being asked. We then provide them that 1 hour of assistance if necessary, to help answer their questions. Some questions we frankly don't have expertise in and don't publish on. So for those, we try to direct them to resources we know that could be of use. And we are willing to do some back and forth over email, like you mentioned, if we find that there's a little more, they might ask for this data point, we help them get it, but they're really looking for a more complete picture, and we can direct them to some of those things, but we are limited to only providing about 1 hour of research behind it. But if we find that this is a question that's coming up again and again, we think about how can we roll this into one of our data products, whether it's our neighborhood pages, maybe this is a basic piece of information, or maybe this is something behind action-oriented research that we should think about publishing.
So you mentioned meeting with people and wanting to be responsive to the needs, but sometimes being limited by, for example, if you go to a neighborhood association meeting and they don't have internet access. I mean, how do you guys work in those settings? What is the primary method of dissemination in those types of meetings?
And that's a great question. So we have our website, which is up, which a lot of people can get through internet connectivity, but some of the core information on our website that people go to are those neighborhood data profiles. And that's a lot of things, something to import to nonprofits working in specific neighborhoods, and they can have access to that data. And a lot of them do have internet connectivity, and that's why we've designed the website at the level it is so that it can really maximize its impact and reach as wide of an audience as possible. But for our other products, whether it's the New Orleans Index or our action-oriented research, to really get it out into the community, we have to have those diversified dissemination methods. You mentioned that you're signed up on our newsletter, and that is one method people can find out when we publish new products. You can sign up for our numbers talk, but for those that don't have internet, that's not really a solution. So by first getting on TV, radio, and print, really trying to saturate the media, that is incredibly useful to a lot of people. And then when necessary, if the appropriate relevant stakeholders, by making sure we reach out to them and get them to the meetings, or working with partners who can do the same.
This isn't really a question, but just more a comment that I'm really impressed with not only how good of a job you all do in sharing your data, but in how you help people understand it and write about it. I mean, I think that's just so good that it's not just, oh, here's some data points. It's like, here's what it means, and here's how you can write about it in your grant. Like, I think it's just such a democratic way of sharing your data, so I applaud you on that.
Thank you very much. And that's something that we've really learned over our years of experience, that people don't just want data. They need that data in some type of context. So if it's our neighborhood data pages, they need to know, well, what does this mean? You may have noticed if you've been to our website that we explain, like, behind, well, what is poverty, what's behind this definition, how do you explain it? So there's a little bit of write-up there that's just-in-time learning. Then they can learn about, what's this margin of error and how can I write about it? Or in the context of our action-oriented research, really put research and some analysis behind the data point to really give it that solid context, and that's of critical import.
Hi, thank you. You talked about how you use some of the American Community Survey data in your neighborhood data profiles. Well, how do you use some other data, like census data, or are there any other data sets that you use?
Mm-hmm. So the American Community Survey data provides that socioeconomic data. We also have basic data from the decennial census, which is your counts of people, and they'll have it by gender, and by age, and by race, and by ethnicity, and some basic housing information. So that's in there as well in our neighborhood pages. We also feature data from the Census Bureau's Local Employment Dynamics database. That is a partnership between states and the federal government that matches up data on unemployment insurance agencies' reporting requirements with IRS data, so they're able to match up where do people live and where do people work and what industries they work in. And this data is run through such that it protects the confidentiality of the user and of all people, and it covers about 98% of all users, and we have that in our neighborhood data profiles as well. We also use data, so in our housing report, we use data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics to look at what's the economic climate looking like, what's the state of jobs in our community, look at some home sales data to look at how the housing market is doing from a basic standpoint. Then we take some of that data, like the Census Bureau data, for one of our recent housing analysis, and we created a demographic projection. So what's our household makeup going to be in the city and the metro in 2020? So we take the variety of sources, but then we work with them sometimes in different ways. So where we might just publish the data in neighborhood profiles, right? And one method with the Census Bureau data, but the other will create a demographic projection, or will maybe do some more analysis to look at it in a different manner.
What's the most interesting thing that you have found in the 2010 census?
In the 2010 census, most interesting thing I found. That's a good question. You know, sometimes I have problems remembering all the different data points in my head because I see them so often. And I'm trying to make sure I remember the key ones, right? Remember the population, you know, the percentages, the trends. The most interesting data point, I don't know about the most interesting, but certainly I think something that's important to think about is while we lost a considerable amount of population, right? Our population was about 484,000 in 2000, it's now about 343,000, or was in 2010. We lost an even greater percentage of children. So I think that's one of the findings that's most profound from the census. And what does that mean for our community moving forward? What does that mean? Why did we lose so many children? What is it about the impacts of Katrina that impacted families with young children so profoundly? And then I would say the other thing I found particularly interesting was when doing the demographic projections, we start with a single year age spreadsheet, which comes from the census, right? So how many 1-year-olds are in Orleans Parish and 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds. And there's this nice little bump at about 4-year-olds. If you add backwards from April 1st, 2010, that would be April 1st, 2006, and that means they were born that they were born after Katrina, right? And this little baby bump that happened after Katrina, like my boss likes to say, you know, kind of woke a lot of people up and thought, well, time you better get living, right? So I would find that entertaining, and when you project it, you can kind of see that bump kind of move through the years.
Kind of a small question, but when you talk about the population of New Orleans, do you always, like, so the 2010 census was 343 or whatever, and then I know that they project 2011 at like 360.
Mm-hmm.
Which one is right to say?
Excellent. So the 2010 census is an actual count. But they counted 343,829. And that's one of the numbers that I know is important to stick in there. Then the Census Bureau also does population estimates. And in 2011, we had 360,000, I think 704, something around there, ballparks. There was a 74 and a 0 in there somewhere. And, you know, that's very reliable. And one thing that we use to kind of check that reliability is we also look at USPS household count. So that's the number of active addresses receiving mail. And if you look at the increase from 2010 to 2011 across the same time period in households receiving mail, it's about the same percentage increase in population from 2010 to 2011. So that's another kind of way to confirm that number. And then as an extra piece of analysis, something that we do in our brief this summer on neighborhood recovery, we looked at how that's going from 2011 to 2012 now, and how our neighborhood's recovering. And we found that from 2011 to 2012, that growth rate has slowed in half. So while we did grow about 5% from 2010 to 2011, we're now growing we grew 2.5% from 2011 to 2012, using June 1st or July 1st as the base. So interesting to look at that, and what we're going to see, well, what we're hypothesizing is that when the Census Bureau comes out with their population estimates next year for 2012, it'll match the same rate increase that we're getting with households. So that's how we take two data sets that sort of are measuring the same thing and use them to compare their different conclusions.
much, Ben, and thank you guys so much for coming.
So much.
And I'm sure we'll stick around if anyone has some very specific questions. Don't be embarrassed to ask. I'm sure Ben's heard them all.
I'll give my best answer.
Yeah, and so thanks again, guys, for being here. Again, if you didn't pick up an evaluation form, please do and sign up so we can send you these slides afterwards. And also our next seminar for the communication series is November 12th in this room at noon with Dr. Maureen Lichtveld. She'll be talking about her work with communities and how to engage communities in participatory research, and she'll talk about her work in the Vietnamese community. And is there anything else I'm forgetting, Chef? That's it? Okay. Thank you, guys.